Good morning. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak at this conference. I heard that this is the first time this conference, and it's going to be actually held every year. And I heard this is very important conference because in 3 years, this is first time in 3 years I actually traveled and left the country. In 3 years. And 3 years, it's passed by so quickly, but it was just mind-boggling. After I actually came to Korea, things have changed so much. And I think that these 3 years accelerated things. Digital transformation in every field, not only businesses, but also education. And as you see, all those boundaries between many different things, like higher education, school education, formal and informal education, those are, I think it's going to be blurred. And I feel very honored to actually speak at this conference. Um, and my name is Kumiko Aoki. I'm from the Open University of Japan. The similar institution in Korea from Professor Myung came from Korean National Open University in Japan has very similar university called Open University of Japan. In Japanese name is Hoso Daigaku, which means Broadcasting University, which I will talk about in the beginning. So I want to introduce, just to give you a background of higher education institutions in Japan. Well, the higher education institution in Japan, I would say those 4-year universities, they're actually 2-year universities and 4-year universities. It's divided in terms of on-campus universities and distance education universities. And this is kind of unusual because any other country, I think, have that clear division between on-campus and distance education universities. But in Japan, it has been, and still there is this distinction between those two universities. And in terms of number of universities in Japan, there are 807 4-year universities in Japan. It's on-campus universities. And with the shrinking population, shrinking college age population, these 807 universities are kind of struggling to survive. And the number of students in 4-year universities are close to 3 million and 2,009,000. And so in terms of distance education universities, looking at the number of institutions, it's only 42. So it's a very small number. And there are those universities, including distance education division of on-campus universities as well. But in terms of distance education university, which is classified by Ministry of Education as distance education universities, only 42. But they have about 10%, a little less than 10% of the student population, about 222,000. So in terms of, you see the size of the picture of higher education institution in Japan. And the institution I come from, the Open University of Japan, has actually 36.4% of the total distance education institution student population. So it's a quite large number of students we have at the Open University of Japan in terms of distance education universities. We have 81,000 students, those student matriculated students. I'd like to talk about, just to give you background of history of open distance education, distance higher education in Japan. The distance higher education was officially recognized in 1950. And as I said, there are two separate accreditation systems. Still, it's two separate accreditation systems, although there has been discussion going on in the government that maybe maintaining those two separate systems may no longer valid. But we have regular on-campus universities and distance education universities. And for distance education universities, mostly open entrance. That's actually the term our university have, the open university. Open university sometimes is considered to be online universities, but we didn't really start as online university. We started as open university, but not online. Open in this case meaning that open entrance. There is no entrance restriction. Well, of course, the student have to have a high school diploma. But other than that, there is no entrance exam, there is no entrance restriction. So we provide everybody who wants to study the opportunity to receive higher education. So that's open entrance, open education means. And in Japan, it started as self-study using print materials. I think many other distance education institutions in other countries are the same. Started as the print materials being sent by postal mail, and probably periodically there is some handwritten feedback and maybe some exams. But in Japan, distance education still maintained on-site exams. It's mandatory, have to have on-site exams. And we're going to talk about later, but in my institution, starting this year, we got rid of on-site exams. We changed into all internet-based exams, which never really happened if we didn't have COVID-19. That's because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we could actually move to totally online exams. And in addition to those self-study using print materials, the study, print-based materials, we have face-to-face classes. Also, this is actually mandated by the governmental regulation. Even though distance education institution, they have to have certain amount of face-to-face classes we call schooling. And so even though it's called distance education, distance higher education, there's certain credit. Every student have to actually come to a site to get credit. And in 1983, my university, Open University of Japan, well, at the time, in English name, it was not really called Open University of Japan. It was called University of the Air. But in 2010, around 2010, the English name was changed from the University of the Air to Open University of Japan. And the 1983, it was actually a revolutionary concept at that time. In 1983, I don't know, many of you may not have been born, but it was before internet, before any online, before any web, but there was broadcasting, TV broadcasting. Everybody has TV set. So if you turn on TV and turn the channel, everybody can receive education. Well, at least instruction. I don't know if it's called education, but instruction. So in 1983, OUJ, the Open University of Japan with a broadcast station, established. The thing is that we actually modeled after the UK Open University, but they didn't own TV station. But in Japan, the government decided to give TV station to Open University of Japan, which at that time was good because it has having own TV station to have to monopolize the channel and doesn't have to share the channel or time with any other companies or institutions. We actually have a dedicated channel, which is good. We still do. We still have that dedicated channel. And but more and more, it's becoming kind of, I would say, the subtle obstacle than probably the opportunity given, because maintaining TV station require a lot of human power and a lot of money. So maintaining broadcast station, and as a name, Hoso Daigaku Broadcasting University indicates, it's becoming kind of a two-edged swords. And for face-to-face classes, we have study centers, as KNO you have around the country. And we have about 50 study centers around Japan. And in terms of regulation of distance higher education, in 2001, the government recognized mediated classes. Mediated classes, what it means? Well, at the time, still it's 2001, before kind of internet being widely spread, before web, before any web conferencing, what they actually pictured in terms of mediated classes, meaning that it's a TV video conferencing, or we actually had satellite station to actually broadcast, have interactive video conferencing. So that kind of the classes the government actually was imagining at that time when they say mediated classes. But over time, the internet started to spread widely, and e-learning become the norm. And e-learning has widely spread, and e-learning was included as mediated classes. And also included was on-demand video. And also at the time, the bandwidth was so small that probably on something interactive would be just discussion boards or forums. So those are actually part of mediated classes, in Japanese called media jugyo. And still this term is used in the governmental regulation materials, and it's mean many different things. And around 2004 and 2007, there are kind of exception established because there are two internet universities. It's called Yashima University and Cyber University. And those exist solely on the internet, which is the first time in Japan the university was allowed to be established on the internet. So what I said, mediated classes has a lot of implications, and we are still kind of bounded by the term, this mediated classes. What it means at the time in 2001, also still the term was used, by using various advanced media via communication satellites and fiber optic cables. So at the time, you can imagine those high bandwidth video conference systems, high-end video conferencing system the government tried to push. They deal with a variety of information combining text, sounds, images, and videos, and recognized as the equivalent in the effects of face-to-face classes in university. This is the interesting part. In the governmental regulation, it said that it has to be recognized as equivalent in the effects of face-to-face classes. Well, nowadays, maybe it may be exceeding the effect of face-to-face classes, but at that time, it was considered to be second class. Maybe still, at some point, it is considered to be second class, but it has to be at least equivalent in the effect of face-to-face classes. And also, the following condition, it has to satisfy the two conditions. The first one is being conducted interactively in real time. And the student can take the classes in the classrooms or places similar to the classrooms, which means that they can kind of imagine connecting two different classrooms through high bandwidth video conferencing system. That's their idea of mediated classes in the beginning. In or after every class, enough opportunities for Q&A, question and answer, or advising have to be given by the teacher or teaching assistant on site or via the internet. This is a very important part, because if we don't provide this opportunity, it's not considered to be mediated classes. So we have to provide some opportunities, enough opportunities, that's a very vague word, but enough opportunities for Q&A on site or via the internet, as well as opportunities for students to communicate one another with regards to the class. So that's the kind of key concept underlying mediated classes. And in terms of regulation for credit requirement in distance higher education in Japan, before March 1998, well, we need 124 credit to obtain bachelor's degree. And I think it's about the same in Korea as well. And for 124 credit, 94 credit has to be self-studied, either through print materials or broadcasting or schooling. And but 30 credit, as I said, has to be schooling, meaning has to be face-to-face. So that was a regulation before March 1998. But after March 1998, it was kind of relaxed. And what is relaxed is that before the 94 credit, it didn't really include those the video conferencing. But after 1998, the video conferencing was included. And after March 2001, actually it's pretty relaxed. So instead of schooling, it can be mediated classes. So from now on, it's possible to have all 124 credit at the distance. And how about on-campus universities? Well, the before pandemic, I would say before and after the pandemic, because there was the big change. The before pandemic, 124 credit was required, and 64 and over credit have to be earned through face-to-face classes. That's given. And up to 60 credit can be mediated classes. But there is a special measure during pandemic. As you know, during the pandemic, or the face-to-face classes need to be canceled, and there have to be some measure to actually, well, to go forward without having face-to-face classes. So there is a relaxing of regulatory requirement, and in terms of the face-to-face classes, it can be face-to-face classes or mediated classes. And mediated class. So in a sense, during pandemic, 124 credit can be all earned through mediated classes, even on campus universities. So there is blurring line between on-campus universities and distance education universities, even in Japan. And currently being discussed is even on-campus universities, it may not distinguish between face-to-face classes and mediated classes. And it doesn't really matter if it's face-to-face or mediated, and all need to be just designed for the goal of the courses. So in the case of the Open University of Japan, my university, the mission is to explore the principles of new liberal education through scholarly research in each of the specialized field. So this is also binding term in my university. It's a liberal education. Liberal education in Japanese is called kyoyo kyoiku, meaning that it's not specialized. It's not vocational education. It has to be liberal education. And to provide university education through broadcasting, so that the Hoso Daigaku, the name comes from broadcasting universities, as I said, and in that the mission statement is stipulated that it has to be through broadcasting. But broadcasting, we are now discussing, can actually broaden the term. It doesn't have to be broadcasting over the air. Broadcasting on the internet can be broadcasting. We'll see. And to respond to the needs of lifelong learning. So Open University of Japan, of course, many people can actually obtain bachelor's degree, and many students come to OUJ to actually earn bachelor's degree, but not all of them. Many people actually come to OUJ to take classes just for enrichment, just for personal fulfillment. And so we are responding to the needs of lifelong learning. Just the timeline of OUJ. So broadcast classes started in 1985, started with 104 courses. And in 1998, nationwide broadcast through satellite started. And the 2006 digital broadcast, terrestrial broadcast actually, digital broadcast, this one is not terrestrial, but the internet TV streaming started in 2008. This was controversial in my university because if we start to broadcast on the internet, many people, especially from those broadcasting field, were afraid that we will lose our status. we may not be able to compete, and also we may not be able to get funding from the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communication, which we get a lot of funding from to maintain the TV station. And so we kind of a latecomer in terms of online education. We only started in 2015, started with only 2 classes in terms of online classes. And in 2020, during the pandemic, we started the synchronous online classes, meaning that using Zoom, and which was also, we're still on a trial. We are trying to make it in permanent basis, but still facing a lot of difficulties. And I will discuss that a little later. So educational models at my university, and I can say asynchronous part, asynchronous meaning that not real time, and synchronous meaning real time. And traditionally, we are focusing on asynchronous mode of learning. Asynchronous has advantages because it's not real time. People can study anytime they want. They are not bound by time. And also, probably not bound by place. So asynchronous was major mode of education model at OUJ. And so we have broadcasting programs. Yes, broadcasting programs was time bound in terms of broadcast time, but nowadays with a recording device, they can actually record and watch anytime they like. And so broadcast courses usually consist of 15 45 minutes programs, and that's 2 credit. And all of them are pre-recorded. There is no live broadcast. We don't have any facility to do any live broadcasting. So everything is all pre-recorded. Everything is recorded before actual course start. And the print materials are also written and actually published before the course start. And final exams on site were actually conducted until pandemic. The on-site exam was necessary. And question box for students to ask questions to the instructor. We have on LMS, there's a question box, and question box actually doesn't go to the question directly to the instructor. It goes to the critical administrative person, and then they will sort and the question. If it's trivial question can be actually answered by administrative people, they would do that and so forth. So that's not really immediate response. And we've been using LMS, the Moodle, that Australian, the free open source LMS, Moodle. I met with the Martin Marcus, that's his name, I think, several times. He's a very nice person, but he created the Moodle. And Moodle, I think, is the most widely used open source LMS in the world. And we have online courses on those LMS. Okay. And also, as I said, we have synchronous part. Before pandemic, we only have synchronous part in face-to-face, which means classroom, face-to-face classes at study center. That's only synchronous. And held at study centers, and usually on 2 consecutive days on the weekend. So Saturday and Sunday, a student and teacher come to one study center, and they actually have really packed classes in terms of the intensity of class, because it's morning to evening. They actually give classes on weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And that's pretty tiring, but many students actually enjoy coming to different study centers in the country, and it's part of their enjoyment. And there is a strong opposition to actually even reduce the number of those face-to-face classes because we want to actually move on to more web-based classes. And some popular classes, some classes, especially those classes which required for certificate for psychology counselor, and they have to actually take face-to-face. So those classes are very popular, and many people, actually 10 times more people than the classroom can handle, apply, and then we have to do lottery for popular classes. But those classrooms at the study centers done mostly by adjunct professors, those the professors at the local universities. The study center director actually ask them to give classes. And they have not much association between those face-to-face classes and broadcasting classes. And over 3,000 classes in total, over 50 study centers in Japan held. But during the pandemic, those face-to-face classes also have to be canceled because we cannot really conduct any face-to-face classes. So in terms of asynchronous part, was not affected at all. Broadcasting programs, print materials, LMS, online classes, they are not affected at all. On the contrary, actually student number increased because many people started to have more time at home to study, and many people started to actually look for the opportunity to study and chose Open University of Japan. But the classroom at the study center were canceled. And still a certain number of credit need to be taken at study center. And so we actually substituted those study center classes at web conferences, Zoom classes. And where those Zoom classes come in. At the first, in July 2020, it was a measure to actually substitute face-to-face classes at study center. But it was actually very popular, especially among students. It's some student, I was in charge of doing questionnaire and survey for those students who took those web conferencing classes. They love those classes because they feel actually closer to teachers. Even in face-to-face classes, it's mostly the teachers standing in front of the classroom and students are listening, and some people may ask questions, but in Japan, it's kind of rare that. So in live web classes using Zoom, people can actually question using chat anytime they want when they actually feel they need to question. And so many questionnaire answers say that actually they feel closer to the teacher. And they also like because they can see the screen better in the classroom. Usually the screen like that in front of that. And usually it's not this big, much smaller. And some people who sit in the back have difficulty seeing the slides. So and so forth. So it was very, very actually well received for some student, of course, but from some student had reservation because if web classes replace face-to-face classes, they actually taken the enjoyment of coming to the study center, and of course coming to not listen to just teachers, also interact with other students. That's the only opportunity at Open University of Japan for students to interact with other students real time. So they really liked. And actually those Zoom classes, if a teacher give enough opportunity for students to interact each other using like breakout sessions or some question and answer sessions, the student like the class better. So there are some lessons we have to learn that we should give enough opportunity for students to interact. And so now we are actually discussing and we are trying to make this web conferencing classes, Zoom classes, into more permanent basis. But in order to do that, we have to change the law of regulations, internal regulations, as well as internal some administrative structures, and which is always kind of the difficult to do that, to change the organization. So in the future, I think we have to be hybrid models, but we have the shrinking budget. I think everywhere is the same. The budget is shrinking, and university regulation need to be changed, which is always endless process of going to get the agreement from different committees, and committee after committee. We have so many different committees, and every committee will be affected to some extent. So we have to actually discuss that. And that the faculty workload need to be reconsidered. Many professors at Open University of Japan were hired to create learning materials. They were not really hired, or their job description is not much of consisting of your interaction with student. Of course, they have to give at least 2 face-to-face classes per year, but that's not really much. But so it's kind of extra burden for professors to actually take on web conferencing classes or Zoom classes. We call that live web classes, actually. Oh, really? Okay. Wow. Okay. I think the OU student characteristics, let me just pass quickly because I only have 3 minutes. And the part I really like to talk is the part I'm going to talk about now, is that we have an increasing importance of lifelong and lifelong learning. And like this conference indicates that, I think we have lifelong learning, but lifelong learning is also getting very important. And because we have changing needs and demands of societies. And also we have the technology changing, and we have to actually fulfill personal development and fulfillment. So lifelong learning and life-wide learning. Life-wide meaning that incorporating, well, we used to think of education as formal education, but we have to think of informal and non-formal education, and we have to recognize those education or learning, I would say not education, learning, as part of the personal learning pathways. Okay, so in terms of personalized learning pathways, we have to consider life-wide and lifelong learning. And we have to consider in terms of the person's past, present, and future. The past, we have to have the things in record. So like e-portfolio, all those e-portfolio have to have degrees and credentials, micro-credentials, those records of the person's past learning. And the present profile, well, that's not enough, but in addition to past record, we have to have the learning profile in terms of what the person's preference of learning, what is the person's learning style, what is their preferable assessment plan, what the learning community is. We cannot think people learn independent of each other. We have to think of the learning as a social activity as well. So we have to create learning communities, which has to be actually presented in present format. And the future, we have to also think of as a learning plan. We have to have macro goals of the person, micro goals of the person, and there are some options. So those personalized learning pathways we have to think of. And then this is something I actually thought of conceptually the last 3 years. The personalized learning ecosystems, we have to think of this, the pathways in terms of content resources, assessment and recognition and learning path management, and those cycles we have to actually go through. In terms of content resources, we have many explosive amount of resources. I don't think we have to really focus too much on creating new materials. I think in the past, every university and every professor, every teacher started to create their own materials, but it's just a waste of time, I think. There are so many good resources available online. They should focus more on interacting and guiding students or learners, not just creating content. So those explosive growth in terms of quantity of resources need to be monitored, need to be searched and identified, and need to be customized, and need to be connected through social learning. And those things are very important in terms of content and resources. In terms of assessment, assessment is also important because people learn using the content but want to be assessed always. Assessment for different reasons. Assessment for knowing where they are in terms of their learning path, and also assessment in terms of validation of the learning so that they can actually show what they learn, what kind of knowledge, what kind of skill they have. So it's a self-assessment and for validation of learning. So it's for a need for ongoing formative adaptive assessment and for scaffolding. And those are many different techniques we now have. So, and the thing is that the assessment need to be reliable and valid. So there are some organizations who actually need to assess those assessment to actually authorize and stamp saying this is reliable and valid. And so recognition, the micro-credentialing and digital badges, I think this part is going to be discussed later. But it's explosive growth of micro-credentialing. I think in Europe, there are actually, the EU has created framework for micro-credentialing. And the micro-credentialing is going to become very important in the future because it can actually visualize every step of the learning, and not only the learning in formal learning, formal education, but learning in terms of informal and non-formal learning. And which is, I think, nowadays is very important because learning opportunities are everywhere, and that have to be limited in the classroom. It can be the student or learner should be able to learn anywhere they like, anywhere in terms of not only in terms of the mode of learning, but also authentic learning and on-site learning. There are many different learning they can actually do. So micro-credentialing and digital badges. And those are, I think it is going to be discussed again later, but the blockchain-based so that it can be authenticated. It doesn't have to be issued by institution. It doesn't have to be controlled and managed by institution. It can be managed peer-to-peer. And that's going to be very important. And it really make it learner-centered, not only learning, but learning pathways. And that is the future. And the learner should own those e-portfolio throughout their lives. And then that e-portfolio would contain all the digital badges depending on different granularity, different the path of the life. And also, not only that, I think this part is kind of not being well thought out and discussed yet, but learning path management will become very important. After learning and after gaining those micro-credentials and so forth, they have to, the learner on their own, it's very difficult to actually manage their own learning path, because they need some guidance, they need some expert opinions, or they need for the social learning peers. So the learning path management will become very important in the future, and has not been really discussed that much yet. And so empowering and recommending. And this, I think, will come into the future, that maybe AI will learn the person's learning learning style, or learning the past learning and so forth, and they learn the goals of the person's the learning, and they can actually recommend what content need to take next, or what path should take in terms of the sequence of engagement and resources, not only resources, but also activities and assessment. So the future of higher education, I would say, no longer one institution can do everything perfectly. I think we need collaboration, need for multi-institutional cooperation collaboration, need for industry, academia, government collaboration, and need for global collaboration, because one country nowadays cannot do everything, and it's at the time for global um, things, and need for utilizing learning analytics and AI so that we can be more smart in terms of recommending and managing those learning pathways, and the need for higher education lifelong learning institutions to collaborate, and we can actually promote truly learner-centered learning. That's my passion. I think the learner should be in charge of their own learning, and we have that technology, we have that the device, and now is the time to actually make it happen. And so we should give flexibility in time and space and mode of learning. We should give flexibility in time and mode of assessment. And we should give flexibility in granularity of credentialing. There is no rigid. We shouldn't actually put so much rigid time frame in terms of how many hours of seat time required for a certain credit and so forth. The learner should be able to learn on their own preferred style and for preferred time and space. Okay, and then so far, I think when we talk about digital badges and so forth, it has been focusing on labor market, the job market, and employers, employability was the big term. But I think what is important, especially in the future, many things will be, I wouldn't say replaced, but many things AI can do, and many things could be automated. Maybe what we need to do is seek more for personal fulfillment and personal happiness, and learning is part of that, the personal fulfillment and personal happiness. And that's, I think, the future of higher education we should actually strive for. And that's conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.